recording, I think. We'll kick things off. Welcome everyone to the March, hard to believe, 350 Madison monthly meeting. We're opening with some photos from an event that was on campus this past Friday, March 4th, and it's going to be ongoing. Stay tuned for more information during announcements at the end of the meeting. And thanks to Mary Lee for taking the photos and oops, muted somehow. Okay, so let me pull up our proper slides and we'll get into things. Okay. Right. Can folks see my slides? Yes. Okay. So as we often do, we'll start by taking 2 deep breaths, connecting some part of ourselves, hopefully our feet, to the ground beneath us. And acknowledging our connectedness to this land, to each other, and acknowledging the long-term connectedness of the original and ongoing people who lived in this land, the Ho-Chunk people, the people of the Big Voice, and their connection that has endured over forced removal, death, and many, many challenges. So once again, welcome everyone to this month's monthly meeting. We have a great speaker lined up for tonight, Jane Elder, and she'll be introduced in a minute by our Executive Director, John Greenler. We'll have a short time for Q&A after her talk, and then updates and announcements from several different groups, so stick around to make sure you're in the know about what's going on. And then we will have time for a little extra Q&A after the meeting ends in breakout groups. But I will say, if you have questions for the speaker during the actual talk, please put them in the chat, and then I'll try to highlight some of them during the Q&A that's part of the meeting. Okay, monthly meeting team, is there anything else that needs to be said at this time? Or can we jump into the main event?
That sounds good.
Okay. So with that, I will turn things over to John Greenler to introduce our speaker for the evening, Jane Elder.
Thanks, Christina. Can you hear me all right? Everything okay? Great, wonderful. Yeah, so it's really a pleasure. I've known and had the privilege to have worked with Jane for over a decade now. And she has been a true champion and innovator on addressing climate change through her 10 years of work as the executive director at the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters, from which she has recently retired. Her career has focused on environmental policy and communications. She was the founding director of the Sierra Club's Great Lakes program and led the organization's Midwest office for many years. Jane was also the founding director of the Biodiversity Project, a nationwide initiative. She holds a bachelor's in communications from Michigan State University and a master's in land resources from UW-Madison. Her personal interests include theater, modern dance, and painting. And I could go on much longer, but I want to pass it over to you, Jane. It's really great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Hey, John, it's great to be here, and thank you for that introduction. It's nice to see you. I'm going to attempt to screen share here and launch right in. Let's see. Have we technologically succeeded? It looks like we have. Great. So I'm going to talk tonight about communicating about climate change. I want to talk a little bit about strategy and also about some practical applications. Much of my time at the 10 years where I was at the Biodiversity Project was dedicated to how do we talk to Americans about complicated topics. And now we have a complicated topic in very complicated times. So I want to dive in, and this happened to me last week and I couldn't get my screens to advance. Screen sharing, pause share more. And it worked in our warm-up.
It did work in the warm-up.
Yeah, I have
If you need to
witnessed it.
reshare, feel free.
All right, let me try one more time.
Yeah.
And get my pause share, new share. Let's try this one, try this one. Ah, there we go.
There we go.
Go technology, thank you for that. So I want to talk a little bit about public attitudes on where Americans are on climate change, a bit about the strategy behind communications and what are we communicating about and for, the art of framing and values-based communications, and then some practical tips for the times we're in. So first, just a quick look at where we are in America. Many of you are probably already familiar with the Yale program on climate change communication and its sister program over at George Mason University. If you're not, you should be. This is an amazing website with incredible information on it. It's free and you can download a ton of really good stuff. They came up with several years ago this concept of the 6 Americas. And that we are in these sectors in the United States where there are people who are alarmed, and I suspect we are among many of the alarmed this evening, the concerned, people who are cautious and a little worried about what's happening with climate change, the disengaged are just like, I'm not worried about this, the doubtful, which is, I don't think this is really happening, and then the dismissive, which is where we can find the denialists. And I think you're mostly all familiar with those kinds of cultural attitudes. The most recent work in terms of where America is within those areas is from 2021. And this is actually very encouraging research. We are at all-time record highs with public understanding that climate change is happening, it's affecting the weather, and it's harming Americans. And the percentage of people who think it's happening, and that's those concerned on up through the alarmed, is a ratio of more than 6 to 1. 76% of Americans are in those top 3 tiers versus 12%. So Americans care, they understand it's mostly human caused, and that's a really great opportunity for communications. I want to talk a little bit about when we communicate, trying to figure out why we're doing it. It's very easy to race out and go, you know, we need a video. And the question is why and for what purpose? So are you trying to advance policy? Are you trying to raise public awareness, change practice in an industry or a community, mobilize the grassroots? Are you trying to build the movement itself? Are you trying to build literacy about the topic? Are you trying to change individual behavior, or is it something else? Because each one of those is a different kind of strategy that takes different tools, different kinds of approaches. And so it's easy in an activist movement to say, we need to do them all. We need to do them all now. But strategically, that's not your most efficient way forward. So be thinking about how you want to communicate and what is the purpose. What makes communication strategic? So part of it is knowing what you want to accomplish. Is it a goal and outcome driven? Do you know what victory looks like as a result of your communication? Is it audience based as opposed to messenger based? Are you reaching out and trying to connect with your audience on what they understand, what their experience is, as opposed to trying to persuade them to think like you? Does the effort support larger strategies? Is it helping build the movement and not just noise off to the side? And are you using insights from social and behavioral sciences to present the information in a way that it can be heard and processed, in a way that it creates meaning for people, so it's not just background noise, more information in and out? So you want to create meaning. Within shaping a strategy, again, that fundamental, why are you doing this? What are your goals and objectives? Who you're trying to reach, and what will speak to them, their values, their concerns, their attitudes. And then if you're successful, what do you want or expect them to think, do, or feel if you reach them? Do you want them to sign a letter? Do you want them to buy a Tesla? Do you want them to install a solar panel? All of those things will require different tactics, but it's important to know how you want to change their experience as a result of getting your message. Keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit about framing here in a minute, that the frame trumps the facts. And certainly living in modern America, you must have figured this out already, that factual information is useful, but if there's a frame that people believe, you have to get past that if you can, in order for those facts to penetrate. Values are the foundation for powerful messages, and we'll talk about those. And language and messengers can either make or break your connection with the audience. Finally, stories are potent and durable, and we'll come back to those as well. So communicating to shift public attitudes on policy, this is where most of my work has been done. I have not done a lot in the area of individual behavior change, and I wanted to share with you how we use things like frames to move an issue along. What the heck is a frame? A frame is a structure and a strategy for shaping the public conversation. It establishes the way we think about an issue. It's trying to work with the human cognitive process to get people to perceive, understand, create meaning, create a sense of connection, urgency. So a frame is about setting the boundaries for reasoning and how it triggers those mental shortcuts in our lives and in the way the human brain works that lead to assumptions and conclusions. And once a frame is established, the frame usually trumps the facts. Some active frames in American culture: burdensome regulation. How long have we lived with this in America? Why not public safety protections? The ship has sailed on that framing a long time ago, but we have been struggling in the environmental movement with this frame that something about regulation is a burden as opposed to an important public safety or public safeguard. One that's not particularly active right now, but was for a long time, this notion of the nanny state. Environmental extremist goes back probably 40 years, and we still struggle with this frame. Tax relief. Why not tax responsibility? All right, and then one that's been interesting in our times, the concept of the big lie. I thought it was intriguing to watch Mitch McConnell a couple of months ago trying to turn that around and trying to flip it, because flipping a frame is a very powerful strategy if you can pull it off. I don't think he successfully pulled it off, and he dropped his tactics and shifted to something else very quickly after they couldn't grab that. So these are active in culture all the time, and it affects the way we are able to reach people because we got to get through all the minefields of those frames. A frame has values in it. It describes the kind of issue we're dealing with. It talks about the specific issue. And then there's all these things that help cue parts of our reasoning process: context, numbers, the messengers that we use, the tone in our language, visual images, and even the metaphors about how we talk about what something is like. So wrapping an issue in values has been something that marketing has been doing in this country for at least 50 years, and political candidates probably since political discourse started after the revolution. It's important to know that these are out there and they're durable, and that they go generation to generation. They get a little bit of flux over time. These are 3 different lists I pulled up here. The one on the left tends to come from some of the more progressive polling. Freedom, personal liberty, love of country or culture, respect for authority, which is still important in America, even for the 60s generation. Concepts of fairness and hard work. The one on the right is from a more conservative research base. Freedom and self-reliance, that deeply we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and why haven't you already done that? And then this notion of the American dream and hard work, another source, equality, liberty, and progress. All those things are in the back of our brains and our emotions as we engage or not with issues. To establish a frame, you got to start with that cultural value. And in environmental work, we strongly recommend. The easiest one for us is responsibility to family and future generations. It has those concepts of stewardship, future-oriented, and family wrapped in there. What kind of an issue is this? If something goes in the environmental issue box, people already take all those attitudes about extremism or freedom of whatever, and place them on them. Or is it a scientific issue? Again, there's a predisposed set of notions. We know from the polling work that most Americans see climate change as a scientific issue, and you're stuck in the science box. And with all the biases that go with the anti-science attitudes and the skepticism about science in our society, all those things are part of the entanglement of working on climate change. And then the specific issues, it might be something like energy standards. Environmentalists tend to start at that third level. We're going to do something about energy efficiency. We're going to do something about line 5. We're going to do something about water quality standards. But you have to go back upstream a little bit and figure out what's behind that so that people know what kind of boxes it needs to go in. So if it goes in the family and future box, that's one thing. If it goes into the personal liberty box, you have a different kind of narrative that comes out of this work. We are, however, as all of you know, at a time of really competing visions of America. And this is a survey that came out called the Evolving Identity Competing Visions of America and Evolving Identity, or a Culture Under Attack. And that's where we're seeing the sort of the frames develop there. And you see it, people, my culture is under attack, or we are all, our society is changing to something more exciting, new and dynamic and equitable. Those are part of ways a frame is shaping out of the tensions that we have right now. For your referral in the future, this is a pretty solid list. These are values that are linked to the environment. That top one up there, responsibility to care for the earth and future generations. Important to know, in American culture, we are much more individualistic than community-based. And caring for the environment is sort of second tier after those other top tier values like freedom and family and responsibility. So it's useful to paste together a message that evokes some of those top tier values, as well as the ones we want to bring into the conversation, such as caring for the earth for long term, sense of place, quality of life. Those are all important, but they're not top tier. So you need to make sure you're aware that you're somehow sparking a connection to a top tier value. So I already talked, climate is seen as an environmental or scientific issue, and there's a lot of other ways it can be looked at. And I hear a lot of people making these arguments, and they're all credible arguments. The question is, are they sticking with the audiences who can only see it through other lenses? So if your audience isn't there yet, make sure there's a way they can find your frame or your type of the issue without just stopping at, well, this is a scientific issue. This doesn't have anything to do with equity or morality. So remember, those frames can create barriers. And I think it'd be very difficult for us right now in America to be broadening this frame. We need to be working on that. But right now the constraints are environment and scientific. So again, all these other contextualizing factors help deepen and expand the impact of trying to put a message in a frame. So context, this is really important for the work we're doing on climate, identifying the cause of the problem and who is responsible. We have a lot of issues in the Midwest where people want to do Midwest nice. And it's like, oh, I don't want to blame anybody. Oh gosh, no. But someone somewhere is responsible for the situation that's gotten us where we are. And it's not about necessarily the blame game. It's identifying there are responsible parties who have made this happen and who can make other change happen. So connecting the dots of an individual episode or an individual situation to the larger system level solutions is also an important part of context, because the way our news media tends to take one crisis and one emergency to the next, if you don't connect the dots, these appear as little episodes and not broader themes or threads. So look for ways to connect the dots to system level solutions. Numbers, just lead with values and follow with facts. And numbers are really, really tricky for something like climate, even your name, right? 350.org, which I always confuse with late Yale's 360 program, as well as the 365 days a year. And that doesn't even get me to the, by 2030, we have to do this with COP21, or was it COP26? So all those numbers are really confusing for people. Try to use real English when you can. What's called social math instead of 33%, 1 out of 3. And look for facts that relate to daily lives, your energy bills, the flood in your community, bacteria at the beach where my kid swims. My kid's asthma got aggravated by the last forest fire. Try to find those real tangibles as opposed to abstract numbers. Now, there's cases where numbers are really going to be important. And often that's in legal or in legislative proceedings, but by and large, they're hard for people to wrap their heads around when there's so many other competing ways to get the information out. On messengers, I simply want to say that messengers are can be as important, if not more so, than the message itself. They need to create relationship with your audience's authenticity and trust. Historically, we've used a lot of our white male executive directors, and I'm married to a former white male executive director as messengers. And if you're speaking to other executive directors, that's probably an appropriate messenger. If you're trying to speak to specific public audiences, they may not be your most authentic and powerful messenger. So look for people who have an authentic relationship with the issue and with the audience. On visuals, bad pictures can undermine a carefully constructed verbal frame, and make sure you've got people in the picture. If you want people to be engaged, they somehow need to be in the picture. I come out of the era with the Sierra Club where I still love those old calendars, but I remember the first time I heard them called eco porn, because they're just like so gorgeous and sumptuous, but most of them don't have people in them. And so if you want people to be part of the solution, they need to see themselves in the solution. If you're working on behavior change, show people taking actions that you want them to do. If you want them to be growing a prairie, show them planting a prairie. Show faces as opposed to their backsides. Now make it easy for us to relate to other humans doing what we want our audience to do. Here are just a couple of quick images from one of the nasty algae bloom in 2014. And what this shows is, one, it's gross. Two, that it's scary. There's some documentation there. It shows how dense it is, but I also like the fact that it shows they had to bring in the National Guard to provide water for Toledo. And that's just one example of how good visuals can help tell the story beyond your words. Another thing I think is really critical, many of you may or may not be familiar with the work of George Lakoff, wrote the book Don't Think Like an Elephant and Moral Politics, well worth reading. He talks about how important metaphors are in helping people wrap their heads around an idea. And so the question is, how is this challenge like something that I already understand? And one of the good examples out of the Frameworks Institute, they talked about some work they were doing on systems change. And systems change is really hard for people to wrap their heads around, often because you can't see yourself in a system that needs this changing. And the metaphor they used was changing systems is sort of like working with computers. If you don't change the fundamental program, you can't expect what the computer does to change very much at all. It's going to be stuck within the structure and the way it's set up. And I thought that was a good example of using a metaphor that most people might understand to deal with something as complex as systems change. Framing elements, tone and language. Be careful, but important. If you can use the authentic we, use it. If you're not part of the we, don't use it. So make sure you're authentic when you're using, we care about these issues. Make sure that you're part of that community or part of that affected group. Use language that is aspirational not argumentative. We love to get in the point counterpoints, and that really rarely helps advance a message. Try to avoid the expert versus public. That plays into this negative notion of experts in our society. And so if you quote a bunch of experts, then it creates distance. And occasionally that's appropriate, but if you're working with a public audience, you don't want people to feel like, well, there's all these really smart people, but they don't understand me and what's happening in my life. Avoid those partisan and political cues to the public when you can. And set up problem solving. People want to, if you're going to introduce a problem, people want to know, well, what can we do about it? And so setting up the notion that, yeah, this is really tough, but here's how we can get there from here. We can solve this problem together, and play off on that American can do. We can do this together. Reinforce the other frame elements and don't undermine them by using strident language if you're calling for cooperation and bridge building. Right? So model the language in the behavior that you're trying to see. A couple things on language itself. These have been proven and practical. Talk about common sense solutions. It's very hard to be opposed to common sense. Talk about balanced approaches. It's hard to be against balance. Talk about taking wise precaution. Which is different than, oh, we can't do this. No, it's just wise for us to take some precaution here, don't you think? Talk about thoughtful and reasonable approaches, safeguarding our health, our communities, and future generations. Talk about protecting vulnerable people, and also about open access to information. And one of my old consulting partners, who was a professional editor, said, avoid multisyllabic Latin-based words. And they easily trip off the tongue, and avoid jargon, acronyms, and eco-speak, and try to be aware of those in your own vocabulary. Stories, so important. Stories have staying power and they get retold. So if you can have a couple of really good stories that have, a protagonist, a conflict that gets resolved, and relies on some kind of particular individual or organization in their heroic or semi-heroic journey, that will stick with people, particularly if there are, real human connections there. You can also humanize climate through those human stories, real lives saved or helped or harmed, real jobs in real communities. And we certainly know of all kinds of things that are happening with the new solar workforce, or on the other side of winter-dependent businesses. Collect and retell those stories. Certainly we're seeing with people who have memory on the land, whether it's, multiple generation farms, whether it's our friends in the tribal nations, the way things used to be, how we've seen the change, and don't just stop at the change. And you've got to take it to that, how do we want to be in the future? Again, that takes people to the problem solving mode. Children can be very compelling. You don't want to exploit them, and you don't want to exclusively use children. And charismatic animals can make a difference, but local species are better. So just quickly, what does a frame-based climate and energy message look like? Here's an example. A national commitment to invest in newer, cleaner sources of energy and make more efficient use of what we have could create new jobs and competitive industries and help clean up our environment and improve our security. So the values this evokes are security, future generations' efficiency, and American know-how. The concerns are cleaner energy, health, or healthy environment and jobs. The tone is pragmatic and solution-oriented, and the action could be, you urge your legislator to invest in clean energy and efficiency by supporting up-to-date building codes in Wisconsin. So all that is behind the action that we want to get to those up-to-date building codes in Wisconsin. We developed this in 2004 with the US and the World Project. It's still a good message. I wish someone would use it. But it's an example that you can use as a template to build your own. So we are indeed in complicated times. So let's talk a little bit about communicating now. I think probably the most important thing is communicate solutions to audiences who are able to receive them. This is not about persuading denialists. And we know that 74% of the country is somewhere on that spectrum of they're looking for solutions and where they fit in. So people are willing to support solutions that make sense to them. Many are willing to consider their behavior as consumers to drive marketplace change. And there's a lot on the Yale site about a recent study on that. But don't ask people to become climate experts. We've tended to do that in climate communications and get everybody down to the parts per million. And most Americans don't need that to know that they're worried and they want somebody to fix this. So if we can explain what some of the fixes are that they can understand, then those are the messages that can bring more people into the conversation. So focusing on what we can do, because right now people are feeling pretty helpless about a lot of things. And the latest report came out from the IPCC this week, buried a little bit in the news, I think, because of what's happening in Ukraine. And then I read another piece on extinction this week. It is grim out there. So people need to know there is something we can do. So on efficacy and pragmatism, these are sort of four things you need in a good message these days on climate. How will the specific action be effective, and will it lead to a bigger solution? So it's not just putting a solar panel on my house. Putting a panel on my house means X, Y, and Z can happen at my community scale or the state scale or be part of a national solution. Always build it up to the bigger strategy. Saliency, which means how close does this align with me and my values? So again, making sure that the message and the action are salient to that particular audience and it has meaning for them. Urgency. What are the practical examples of how, if we take action right now, we can make a big difference, like staving off a catastrophic flood or more fires, or what's the connection between action now and things that will let me feel less freaked out in the future. And then finally, hope. Those of us who are long-term environmentalists, I joke, we're just terrible dinner partners because we had a friend in from out of town, and within a half an hour, Bill and I were in the extinction and climate, and we were way in the doom. And no one rallies around despair. I said this in my talk in January, defeat is not a morally acceptable option. And so we need to provide people with a sense of hope that our actions can make a difference and will make a difference, and be able to explain that. And if you're hopeful, you don't have to be optimistic, and I think there's a difference, but if you're hopeful about the efficacy of taking action, other people will pick that up. And here's where it's tricky. We need transformation in order to deal with the timeline we're on for climate. But we also need pragmatism to build momentum towards that. So reiterating, where's the action in policy and practice that's most leverageable right now? I think in Wisconsin, it's local government, it's the private sector, it's the marketplace, and potentially the federal government, but they're not quite there yet. The other strategy is to just go to the task at hand and not sweat the C word. And that means focusing on the solutions and the other benefits those solutions will bring to a community or individual. So co-benefits might be water quality, flood protection, better public health and safety, soil conservation, more green space in the community, incredible opportunities for workforce development and community planning. So focus on the local action and just get it done without necessarily having to give somebody the tutorial on why climate change is the focus. So reach people where they are through their values and concerns. Lead with values, follow with facts. Focus on solutions and not climate change 101 unless you are teaching climate change 101, and that's what your students will be tested on. use conversational language and messages and stories that provide hope and efficacy, that trigger that sense of we can do this together, and bridge to the societal, not just individual action. I like to give credit where credit is due when I'm borrowing a lot of people's materials. These are many of the sources that I've tapped: Frameworks Institute, Center for Story-Based Strategy, the Yale program, and the George Mason program. And that's where I am. And if you need to reach me and want a copy of the slides for your reference, I'm at jane@janeelderstrategies.com. And with that, I'm happy to take a breath and take some questions.
All right, thanks, Jane. And as Jane mentioned, her slides will be available if you contact her directly. So we'll make sure to put her email in the chat so that if that's of interest to you, you can reach out. Okay, so we have time for a couple questions. So I'm going to start with Marion's in the chat. And Marion, if you want to clarify or expand, feel free. And that's, can you talk about how an organization might work on the frame and those different elements, or any kind of compelling examples? If you had a specific idea in mind, Marion, feel free to jump in.
No, that's good. Just this is really very interesting and very compelling, and perhaps our board is already doing this, but I'm just wondering for our type of organization, or there are many environmental groups out there. So yeah, anything you might say.
I think one of my greatest disappointments is that the large scale that I think the environmental movement in America has sort of missed the train on getting their framing act together.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I were to ask any of you, what's the dominant frame on climate change right now? And you can, if you know what it is, put it in the chat. And part of it is that we just haven't gotten our act very well together on this.
Mm-hmm.
For a local organization, there are a lot of things on Frameworks Institute that are how-to, right? And most of their stuff is downloadable for free. So you could just, in a sense, do your own bootstrap. What are the values? What kind of issue? And then look at those other steps and flesh out a plan. I think the most important thing is, that goal and objective. Who you're trying to reach, and what do you want the impact of that to be? And what they call the delta. How do you want to change attitudes, behavior, experience? What do you want to change, and will your communications get you there? So there's lots of ways to do it. You can do it by yourself. You can bring in consultants to help you. I think it's a lot of fun to build a message strategy around these kinds of approaches. And then it's important also to just make sure you're not just working on your own hunches, but what does the research say? And the Yale climate change research down to the congressional district has you can download for free from Yale how the people in my congressional district feel about climate.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So if you went on their site and did Wisconsin Congressional District 2, you could find out what the primary public attitudes were. And so use research, not just your own hunches. And it's also good once you've developed a message, if you can afford a professional to do a focus group for you, great. If not, find somebody who knows how to do focus groups, and invite the kind of people you want to influence into a conversation about how they actually think about these issues, and hear from their language and their experience how they see the issues. There's nothing more frightening and eye-opening than being on the other side of a focus group glass wall, or the secret camera. Like, but it's also helps us realize not everybody thinks the way we do. So those are just a couple tips, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to do Seth's question and then circle back to Kermit's. So he has a note in the chat about the climate change equals jobs message is giving the issue the kind of reframing it needs. Do you have any thoughts on that particular framing of that particular climate issue?
if people think about it as a scientific issue, then they have to go through a couple of cognitive steps to go, what do you mean jobs? I thought this is about scientists. And so you're going to have to connect those dots between the people who see it as an environmental issue or a scientific issue. So there's going to be a couple of steps there. So it's that you got to make those connections. And then the question is, who cares about jobs and climate change? And so it might be young students coming out of technical school. It might be people trying to raise the levels of employment in their community. It might be a particular manufacturer. So who is this a meaningful message to? And it's a little weird right now with where we are with unemployment as to who that message is salient with. So you look at that saliency, urgency, efficacy, and hope and figure out who hears it. I think it's certainly a powerful argument. That's one where you got to wrap it in the values of hard work and American can do, and then sneak in some facts and statistics, but don't lead with the statistics of the job market. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think those are helpful observations. This is a big question, but I'll have you, if you can give like a very short answer, and then maybe we can revisit in the breakout. So this is just a question about the effectiveness of frame-based messaging. Either has it either not been adopted properly? Has it not worked? Is it working in ways we don't intend? Who messages for framing to get people to change their behavior?
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff, including examples up on the Frameworks Institute website. I think we've seen certainly corporate America has figured out framing, right? And they use it all the time. It's not, what is it with Subarus, right? Subarus equals love. Oh my God, it's a car. It's a car. and they have tied it to one of the deepest human values and emotions. And they've been doing this successfully for 10 years. And so also one of my favorite old ads, and I'm just giving my age away here, when Chrysler Corporation was still the Chrysler Corporation, right? They did it's not just your car, it's your freedom, right? And we associate our individual, right? So yeah, it's a car, but it's my freedom. And so corporate America has been very successful at that. And of course, watching political campaigns, you can see the power of the framing. I'm intrigued right now because it's happening somewhat organically, but just, how many people have picked up on the phrase Slav Ukraine and are getting behind that, what that means to the Ukrainian people, and what it means for the fight for freedom and democracy. So they didn't do a lot of research. It's one that is just the moment has been right to connect with people around the world. I think the environmental movement has been challenged in framing because we're complex and diverse, and we have multiple opinions about solutions. Whereas a corporate agenda is very specific on, we want to move this consumer into our circle, or a political candidate wants to move this demographic in this suburb of Denver on Thursday. So part of it requires discipline, and it also requires consistency over time. Some of the progressive foundations have been quite effective in their work in terms of the way they framed some of their philanthropy. And so I think it can be powerful. Anybody can use it. It just takes some discipline and the ability to repeat and repeat and repeat your message. And when you're tired of your message, it may mean that it's just finally beginning to stick with other people. And we get bored. It's like, well, we did that 3 months ago. Let's change. So there's that tension between keeping things fresh and keeping consistent so that people remember you're the voice, you're the source. So it's difficult and it's expensive to do right? Because you need visuals, you need research, you need to be able to track how you're doing. And most environmental groups don't have the independent resources to do pre and post testing with public opinion surveys. And they can't afford professional ad agencies to just tweak those visuals. On the other hand, you don't have to be Hollywood to use common sense around values and inclusive language. So use the best that you can with the resources that you have. And it's just interesting to see how people will open up around a confrontation when they're surprised that either you're not confrontational or, that really might create jobs in our township. So finding those ways to get past the resistance into opening up the reasoning process, which makes the brain have to work a little bit on where it's going to store that information, which is part about creating meaning. So anyway.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jane.
Sure.
All right, we'll move on to updates and actions, but do stick around if you have, there were some other good questions in the chat. So hopefully folks will have a chance to stick around. Okay, can folks see my slides? Okay, wonderful. So kicking us off is Phyllis. You can share a little bit about what's happening with the tar sands team.
Certainly. So we need your help. Enbridge got ahead of us in the number of comments submitted to the DNR about line 5, and it's quite likely that they're still ahead. And it is crucial that we end the comment period on March 18th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time with more, hopefully many more comments against line 5 than for it. So how did they get ahead of us? Well, up to February 2nd, we were concentrating on recruiting and training people to testify at the virtual DNR hearing, and we did great at that. At the hearing, 167 people testified, and 147 of them, or 88%, were opposed, and eloquently so. Of the 20 who spoke in favor, only 2 were not obviously making a living off of pipelines or related businesses, and all of them just repeated the same tired falsehoods that Enbridge gave them. But meanwhile, Enbridge had launched a big postcard campaign, and they sent out untold thousands, which is easy to do when you have billions to spend, of tear and send postcards that some recipients signed and sent into the DNR. And a press release from the Enbridge Front Group, Wisconsin Jobs and Energy Coalition, published on February 10th, reported that they were ahead 3-1 with 3,800 comments in favor of the pipeline. So we are upping our game. First question is, have you submitted your comments yet? If not, that's okay, but please do so within the next 24 hours. Someone has or will dropped into the chat. I've lost where I was. The 2 easy to use action pages where you'll find sample ballots and talking points, which create a quick way to compose and send them. Next, this week, we'll be sending out thousands of our own tear and send postcards to Wisconsinites who care about the environment. And if you get one and you've already submitted a comment, please get a friend or neighbor to sign it and send it in. And most importantly for you, one thing before that though, new volunteers have stepped forward and are getting national groups to send out action alerts asking for line 5 comments, and that is awesome. And thousands of them are coming in. And most importantly, we're doing phone banks. And just last weekend, with 2 2-hour shifts, we called 267 numbers, left 129 messages, had conversations with 34 people, and 26 told us they would send the comments. And 6 volunteered to phone bank with us. Now, I know that some of you felt a cold shiver go down your back when I said the words phone bank, but you can do it. We have a wonderful list from our partners at Sierra Club of people who have taken some action in the last 6 months, and we have found that almost all of them are enthusiastic and fun to talk to. So please try this. Put aside your shyness, pretend you are bold, and fake it till you make it. I am betting that after you do your first 2 hours, you will sign up for another shift. So next one, please. So as you can see here, there are only 6 shifts left before the opportunity is gone. So please decide on at least one, but hopefully more shifts, and contact me so that you'll get the links. And if none of these work for you, but you're willing, we can train you and you can do it on your own. But it's really much more fun when we do it together. We're using the VAN system, Voter Action Network, which provides you with name and number and the script on your computer screen and the means to record it all. And the shift leader is available during the shift to give advice. And that's really all there is to it. So I hope I've convinced some of you shy people, a group I once belonged to give this a try. It will be something to tell your grandchildren when they ask what brave thing you did in the struggle to save our planet. And in closing, there are 2 more things you can do instead of or in addition to phone banking. You can do your own private phone bank or email effort. Try setting aside 2 hours. And instead of talking to strangers, just talk to your friends. Or craft an email and send it to as many of your friends as you can in that time. We also have a data inputting project that will help us critique the draft EIS. So if you can put in a few hours of tedious computer work, you could help us craft some powerful arguments. And thank you for all you've already done to stop line 5 and for what you're going to do in the next 2 weeks, which are so crucial to our future. Thanks.
Thanks, Phyllis. And I think we got most of the links you sent us in the chat. If any are missing, we'll grab them during the next video. Okay. So Lauren, can you introduce the video we're about to watch?
Sure. So I'm Lori. I'm a member of 350.org's climate justice team, and our team wanted to share with you this brief video clip. The clip is actually a preview of a PBS independent lens film. It's called Cooked: Survival by Zip Code. And we chose this one because of a couple reasons. The first reason is this is really a critical example of how race and class and climate change all intersect. And it's very close to us. It takes place in Chicago. So it's, it really comes close to the heart. And the second reason is that one of our roles we see as a climate justice team is to share resources with you all. And we are hoping that the clip might entice a few of you to watch the whole 1-hour film. It's free on YouTube and on PBS website. It's definitely worth watching. So if you have time to see the whole thing, that would be great too. All right, you ready to roll?
What's the best way to prepare for disaster? It's a question lots of people are asking these days as the planet heats up and we face one unprecedented disaster after another. My interest in disasters started with one specific disaster that took place in Chicago in July 1995, one of the deadliest heat waves in US history so far.
We go to extremes in Chicago, and that's why people love Chicago. We go to extremes.
I walked into the room and I saw my grandmother lying across the bed, face up. I looked over at the window and it was nailed shut.
Sexiness for the news media was it was about the heat. But the real story is, why were people in these neighborhoods dying? People weren't dying on the north side. People weren't dying in the Gold Coast. People were dying on the south and west sides.
The minute you see the refrigerator trucks, that means there's so many dead bodies that the coroner doesn't have room for them anymore. That's enough.
I think it's really about the heat.
It's not really about the heat. There is no need for as much poverty in our community as there is.
It's a story about these deeper social fault lines that make some members of a city vulnerable and keep others protected and blissfully ignorant about what's happening to people who live quite close to them.
Do you think they're addressing that?
Do I think the city is addressing the extreme poverty in communities of color in Chicago? Is that what you're asking me? Don't be ridiculous.
So what's the best way to prepare for disaster? guess it depends on where you live.
Okay. That was really compelling. Thank you, Climate Justice Group, for sharing. We're gonna put in the chat if you want to do a watch party together. All right, we're going to turn things over to Russ, who will share a little bit about the March 4th to Earth Day project.
Yes, and it started March 4th, so we had our first Friday down at Library Mall. Every Friday between now and Earth Day and on Earth Day, we will be at Library Mall from 5 to 6. You're welcome to join us. It's an interesting collaboration of at least 5 of the campus environmental groups with other groups in town, in particular 350 Madison and the Art Collective. It's not a demonstration. It's a creating a space that is an invitation for students to move from climate despair to climate activism. And with specific asks of doing the work that Phyllis already talked about sending comments to the DNR about Line 5. Also specific asks about divestment of the UW system from fossil fuels. And it's a chance to learn this dance that's kind of under the radar, but we're going to do something on Earth Day that I think is going to be really fun. And Diane is going to teach folks this dance, but it's great because you don't have to learn the whole dance. You can learn some of it. You can learn it to your competency level or your interest level. And we'll be doing that on most Fridays. This coming Friday looks to be really cold. So if you're interested in coming down to learn the dance, check in with Diane or myself first, just to make sure that that's still actually happening. I guess that's it.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Russ. This looks fun and meaningful. So really excited for this. Okay, CCST. You're up.
It's Susan. Okay. Actually, I don't have a lot of things to announce tonight, other than that the regular monthly meeting of the Community Climate Solutions team will be as usual on the third Thursday of the month. That would be March 17th at 5 o'clock. And if you are not already part of the CCST mailing list, you can just contact me here, Susan Millar at 350madison.org, and we'll be sure that you get an invitation. We are looking, as of course all the teams are looking for new volunteers. In particular, as Kermit would tell you, because he leads the Middleton Community Working Group, and as I would tell you, leading the Madison one, we are looking for more people who are willing to spend a couple hours a month connecting with our local alders to help them start to look through the frame of climate at all of the different things they're doing within the city work that they are doing. And the third thing, actually, Julia De Palma was supposed to be doing these announcements, but right now she's producing a document that will go out to our action participation list in response to a request from one of our alders. So I guess I have to make this announcement myself. I've actually not only been nominated, but now I'm a member of the City of Madison Sustainable Madison Committee. So that means that I get to watch the slow gears of government work from the inside for a little bit.
Congratulations, Susan.
Yeah, thanks.
And thanks for that update from the CCST. And yeah, congratulations. And as my supervisor sometimes says, congratulations and condolences on your recent
yeah, I'm on the
appointment.
I'm working on the working group that's focusing on updating the 2011 sustainability plan, and that's pretty interesting, actually.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Great. And then we have Nikki.
Yes.
You're the one.
Hello. So I would like to congratulate our volunteer of the month, who is Massimo, and he could not be here tonight, but he will be getting a recording of this. Massimo has been incredibly helpful because he has been doing the kind of work that not a lot of people want to do, that is very back end. He is an IT expert, so he has been taking requests and making sure that things get done on the back end with all of our technology. Everything that we do is made better by efficiency. And Massimo is one of those people that is helping our organization run more efficiently by processing these requests and doing this grunt work that is not necessarily the most exciting, but he is fantastic at it. He is not currently here and is taking a small break from volunteering because he is currently hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. So that is why he is not here right now. He is 100% off the grid, but hopefully when he gets back, he'll get to enjoy being volunteer of the month, but also hopefully come back and continue to assist us with these very, very important duties that are sometimes undersung. So congratulations, Massimo, and we hope to see you again when you get back from Maine.
Great, thanks, Nikki, and congratulations to Massimo when he returns. Seth, I think I had one more announcement from you on Defest and Defund.
Thanks, Christina. The Divesta Fund is having its regular meeting this month, but we're also having a special meeting that we want to make an earnest plug for, 7 p.m. March 14th. We're having this special meeting because the national coalition of which we are a part, Stop the Money Pipeline, is about to launch a new campaign called Wall Street's Moment of Truth, People or Fossil Fuels. And will our team be a part of it? That's the big question that we're going to be determining. So the more folks who come, the likelier that we can kind of summon that can-do effort that's so deeply entrenched in our national value system, and really work to, as they say at Stop the Money Pipeline, stop the flow of oil by stopping the flow of money. So 7 p.m. March 14th, message will go out to the list soon. I think the entire 350 Madison list, actually, and be great to see you there.
All right, thanks, Seth. And then last announcement is save the date for our next monthly meeting in April. That will be on April 5th, same time, 7 p.m. And we'll have Paul Domain, Board Chair of Honor the Earth, speaking to us. So should be really, really good, and put it on your calendar. With that, we have a late breaking breakout room. So we'll have room 1, as is often the case, will be short Q&A with our speaker, Jane Elder. And Eve Emschwiller has some updates on divestment at, or lack thereof, at UW-Madison. So that will be room 2 if you want to join. So those are your options. Newcomers, please do stick around to get connected with our volunteer coordinator, Nikki. So Marion, you can stop recording.